This week on the Old School RuneScape update, Pole 83 Castle Wars changes arrive with a caveat around plaudits. The Sailing Alpha was a resounding success mostly. We tell you what to watch out for going forward. Then we take a look at the RuneFest stage sessions and what makes Old School feel like home. This is the OSRS Update, Episode 71, recorded Saturday, April 5th, 2025. Feels like home. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of OSRS Update. Sirion and myself are here as we are each and every week. And, you know, this week we thought we'd just be discussing Pole 83 Castle Wars changes, but we have some more news on sailing, and we're also going to delve into the RuneFest stage sessions and go over a few of those as we wrap up the coverage on RuneFest 2025.
Every time we talk about RuneFest, I'm like, this is going to be the last time. This is when we're going to wrap up, and you know. But no, there's a lot to come out of it. Weeks worth of content, so.
Yeah, and I mean, if we wanted to, we could spend an entire episode on each talk, but I mean, at that point, we're kind of belaboring the point, aren't we?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Nonetheless, of course, if you guys want to follow along, full show notes can be found over at update.show/OS. You can also subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast listening services over at update.show/OS and just click your favorite podcast service, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Cast, Spotify. They're all there, as well as YouTube at youtube.com/@OSRS update. And, you know, a funny little thing happened this week. On the RS3 show, when it came time to talk about how to subscribe to that show, you know what I did? I gave those people the Old School show link to subscribe by accident over voice.
All right. Well,
but it might have been because we were discussing sailing.
If you are joining us on the RS3 show by accident or on purpose, welcome.
Indeed. Okie dokie. So Pole 83 Castle Wars changes. These were voted on, and we talked about these when the poll went live and some of the changes that were going to be brought by this. But one of the big things that did stick out is that even though one of the features that came with this update was thought to have been a good idea, they have pressed pause on them. And specifically, we're talking about the plaudits that are available in the Castle Wars reward shop.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think in general, giving more rewards, probably not a bad idea. There's a community of people that like playing, and giving them more things to get out of it, always good. But it's a little bit unfortunate that what they actually saw is more people AFKing to get the rewards, which goes against the whole point.
Yeah, and we were looking at things like the blighted fish, the blighted super restores, as well as blood runes up to soul runes, rather, in that case, as well as coins too in that package. But they have temporarily disabled the purchasing of the plaudits, and we'll be looking more into that next week. They say the goal was to provide extra rewards while playing, but in practice it resulted in more people AFKing rather than engaging with the minigame. So with this, Castle Wars is meant to be fun and competitive activity, but right now the crates were encouraging the wrong kind of gameplay. And next week they'll be back with a revised approach, which they say makes sense for players who genuinely enjoy Castle Wars rather than just a way to stock up on resources. They say that we're aware that there are some concerns about this, and they've heard the players loud and clear, and will be keeping in mind all feedback as they work towards a solution on this, and more will be on that in next week's update.
Yeah.
So
curious to see how they're going to address this. Probably maybe based on, I don't know, activity, number of kills. I don't know. That also.
I mean, if you
doesn't make
gain
sense.
it by kills, that's
Yeah, I don't know how you can solve this, especially because I think you want to also allow a wide variety of, roles to be valid within Castle Wars, right? You want
Yeah.
people that run the flag, but you also want people that defend the flag, your own flag and your own base. So I don't know.
And it's difficult because you're dealing with content that is 2 decades old at this point, and you with more things being added to it, the question then becomes, well, maybe the approach will involve some form of like you mentioned, some kind of activity tracker, because if you gate it to who caps and maybe who gets kills, then at that point you're really limiting yourself. So you'd have to go more granular than that. Who does damage to a barrier? Who does damage, even if it's only 1 or 2 ticks to another person? So it's a very complicated subject to handle, I believe. So
yeah.
But other things that came with this, of course, the Castle Wars brews, the ability to wear helmets, bandages scale with hit points and can actually overheal, which I think is something that's probably been needed since the very beginning of Castle Wars. Both those aspects, specifically on the bandages there, and then the portal changes. Those were the ones I remember when we talked about this that I were most looking forward to. So everything aside from that is in with that. So
yeah. No, like I said, I still have some concerns about the fact that we are having specific rules enabled for only specific worlds. Like, it doesn't help making the offering of what is old school RuneScape more clear. And I would, like, if this is really the way we want to go, then maybe we should be doing like smarter instancing, where if you move like into like the Castle Wars area, you automatically get sort of moved to one of these worlds. You don't have to hop manually.
Right,
but
that would be the holy grail for everything minigame, wouldn't it be?
Yeah, exactly. Like, have specific minigame worlds. But all in all, I think this will help in revitalize that part of the game, and Castle Wars is quite iconic. So what can I say?
Yeah,
overall probably is still
I remember Castle Wars being some of the earliest events that we hosted as a fan site back in the day.
Yeah.
And they always worked because you could just, go in a portal, and if you didn't want a PvP, man the barricades.
Yeah, exactly. So to me, this is a net positive. I'm happy that it's still getting some love. And I'm very curious to see how they're going to solve it.
My number one issue with things like Castle Wars and Soul Wars is just going in and getting immediately killed.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess you just got to kind of turn the page and get in on the PvP angle for that then to prevent that from happening. But in any case, the Rune Pouch UI also got an update this week. I like the way this looks.
Yeah.
I already have a Rune Pouch, and it was very useful in the combat that I've done so far, and some of the quests it's been taken on for that. So I like the changes that were done to the UI, but a couple of other little changes. A bug has been fixed that causing the Moon's Apparel to stop functioning if killed with burn damage.
Interesting. I've never had that happen, of course.
Yeah. Autoweed was appearing incorrectly off when it was on, and vice versa. And there's now an optional warning when using items on an Explorer ring to elk them, and you can disable this in the in-game settings if you don't want it. Following up from previous patch weeks, and when you're elking things, you do kind of want to make sure you don't elk things willy-nilly. But that's Poll 83. We also have an update on sailing, specifically the Sailing Alpha survey results. The survey that everybody took, hopefully, if you played the Sailing Alpha. 65,918 people set sail in the Alpha. Now, with this, looking at this, I was astounded to see some of the openness that came from this survey. That's the first thing I'll say. the openness of sharing this data here, but you pointed out something that's very important going forward, I think, for the success of the skill.
Yeah, so as important as it is to get feedback from the people who want the skill and make sure this is actually what they asked for, the size of the investment also means you need to make this at least fun for the majority of players, right? You can't. Most updates, what I say is, if you don't like quests and one of the month's main updates is a quest, then suck it up. Next month is going to be PVM again, right? So to speak. But with skills, you don't really have that luxury because you're looking at multiple years of actual development being put into this.
And more than just one team on this, because a lot of the times when you have skills working, or they develop skills for the game, it's 2, maybe 3 teams coming together to do that and push that thing out the door.
Yeah, exactly. So that's quite a lot of and that's why what they said here, and I will quote directly from the news post. Unfortunately, participation from no voters was low, as they only made up 5.8% of people engaging with the playtest overall. They then follow up with a little bit of information about, why it's not that all of the no voters quit or that all of the yes voters suddenly started playing more. They actually didn't see that much variation in activity between yes and no, that would be statistically significant. So really what we saw a lot is that very few people who voted no actually engaged with the alpha. Though if you look at the survey, we saw significantly more response from the no voters, relatively speaking, I think. So that's the good thing. But
yeah, and with that you kind of wind up with a bit of a siloing effect on that, and it raises the question in that, if you had somebody who voted no on sailing initially, what are they feeling with respect to some of these questions, and how is their experience with the skill? Because the one thing to me that stood out in going through each of the results is that everything that was answered had a plurality of people answering in the affirmative, pretty much that it was good, as in when it comes to for example, controlling your boat, people found that easy. People found it easy to do the charting task. People really enjoyed the first Barracuda trial, temper tantrum, and so on and so forth. In that, if you add up the number of people who said fun or extremely fun or voted in both of the affirmative options, most of them had a majority to it, which initially caught my eye, and then I saw that exact same thing that you saw about the lack of people who voted no participating in this alpha. So it raises a question of the entire OS community. How many of the OS community that we have are on the yes side for sailing, and is that going to be enough to carry it forward to a happy place when it arrives?
Yeah. It is worth mentioning that, if you look at the question, how happy are you about sailing being added to the skill after development is finished? There's a big focus on the fact that most people are very happy about it. But if you add up unhappy and very unhappy, which is about 16%, that is slightly more than the number of people who voted no in the original quest, right? Now, there's the I didn't vote and I don't remember camps, of course, but the alpha seems to not have convinced everyone. That is the message that seems to be missing somewhat here. And I do think it's important that we do get people who voted no actually trying out the game and giving honest feedback about it, especially It is so easy to continue to be angry about sailing if you never really play it. And I get it, right? It's fun to be angry. It's a little bit addictive.
It's good for engagement numbers.
It's good for engagement numbers, but I wonder if there are people who have already made up their mind that they're going to hate sailing and they don't even want to give it a chance, so that they can continue to be angry about sailing, because if they try it, there's actually a chance they might like it.
And see, that's the thing. I just want to say one thing. You were in the no camp. I was in the no camp.
I'm still in the no camp.
Right. In terms of what we voted, but we're not gonna, bitch and moan when it comes to the game, because I feel like it's not gonna hurt the game and it's gonna fit.
I think it's going to change the game, and I don't necessarily know if I like the game for the better, but it's not going to change the game to an extent where I'm going to hate it.
Right, that's what I mean.
And I think the overall level of trust that I have, always had, but now have in an even bigger amount, is that they can make this work within the confines of the skill.
Yes, and that's why it's important to have people participating in these tests who were on the no side.
Plus, I want this skill to be a success so that we get more new skills, including shamanism, in the future. And the only way that I can make that happen is by engaging.
Exactly. But like you said, there's a lot of people who are, happy to be angry, and I
feel that a part of the group of people that is angry because for the sake of being angry. And that's always the case with online debates.
Yeah.
But there's gonna be more technical, there's gonna be a beta next. Please, if you are one of those people and you're listening to this, really just give it a shot, because look, maybe you actually hate it, and in that case, give that feedback. I'm not mad, right? Everybody is entitled to their own opinions, but if you don't try it, you really don't get the full picture.
And I feel like this is a very important thing to say, specifically to the OS community, because the whole reason this game exists is because there was a beta that went bad in RuneScape 2, known as the Evolution of Combat beta, and that was That was one of the predicating factors that led to OS. Is the community not liking EOC because there was a group of people who were happy to complain about EOC and continue on that path.
It's bullshit
because the beta was taken bad.
It's bullshit to compare sailing to EOC. EOC changed the existing game, right? It was
No. Yes. But what I'm saying is that there's the same type of people who are just happy to be angry.
Yeah.
In both cases.
I think the EOC concerns were, I don't want to go as far as call them genuine, but I think EOC was undercooked.
I think they were justified in the long run.
Yes, I think they were justified in the long run, but they didn't spend the time to get it right because they rushed it out, right? It was not good on.
Yeah, because it was a project that had a deadline because they had to launch the 6th Age in February or March.
And I think they moved the game in a different direction in terms of where combat went, right? It was much more focused on action bar design and manual inputs and all of that stuff. And that's a valid design choice, but it is a departure from an underlying game mechanic, right? It's part of the core of the game was the combat system. Whereas with sailing, we're really not touching anything else. We are maybe challenging what a skill can be, but unless you are really have a compulsory need to be maxed, you can just choose not to engage with sailing.
Well, we'll talk about that compulsory need. Emphasis on the COMP part in a little bit.
Yeah. I think one thing, because I don't want to spend too long on this, because I think none of this feedback is surprising. One thing that just stood out to me was the XP rates, where people asked it to be faster.
Yeah.
I don't think it should be faster. I didn't have enough time engaging with the skill as is to really keep up with the charting and the discoveries, right? I kind of want not to run too far behind on the discoveries. I feel that I should be able to sort of
well, every action in the alpha had pretty much the same XP drop in that area, and I think that's maybe giving the signal why people were concerned about the XP rate. But granted, we were in the starting zone for most of it. So.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, I do think it will speed up later on, but like I said, I would like to make sure. Like even now, the charting felt like it started falling behind. I'm hoping that the skill progression remains as such.
Yeah,
it's the same as I hate comparing with archaeology again, right? But
no, you're valid.
I want to make sure that you don't just skip through the first few spots very quickly and then have to go back afterwards to tick off like the things. I would love if the XP rates and I'm fine if the XP rates are faster, but then the early charting tasks should probably be spread out across the levels a little bit more so that you don't have to go back and finish all of them.
Yeah. Another thing I was happy to see in the feedback was the water visuals, because that came up on our episode as well, in terms of, the fact that it just felt a bit empty. And as such, people have suggested waves, currents, or other elements to make the ocean feel more active. And I don't remember if it was you or Thaxi that mentioned the Zelda comparison.
That was me. I think just small activities on the way,
right,
that you can do really works quite well. But also, I think the comparison with Zelda is like you can always see the destination on the horizon because like the camera just works a little bit better, and with a limited view, like you don't get this perspective where I don't know. Do you know the game Journey? So Journey is a really interesting game in that there's no tutorial, there's no anything. Basically, you're dropped in the middle of a desert, and all you see in the distance is like a high structure. And you're not necessarily forced to go there, but we are humans. That's the interesting thing. That's where we go.
That's
right?
a mystery.
It's a mystery, and that's a destination that you want to go to. Zelda, the Wind Waker, has a similar thing where the island is always visible on the horizon in the distance where you're going to. That you can't really replicate that very well in sailing, and I think that's a thing they need to solve.
Yeah. And then, of course, they also mentioned that HD mode will help with this a bit too, providing the additional fidelity for people who are using the official client as something that can help with the water as well on that. So. And I think that the thing that I was most pleased to see in this post was primarily just the feedback that was taken on, because there were lots of things in addition to the ones that we touched on with that. So overall, like you, I feel like the team is going to do everything they can to get this out the door in a state that's going to be good for the game. So. Okay. We also, of course, mentioned that we want to talk about some of the RuneFest stage panels, and we're going to start off with the OSRS Summit Q&A. And I mentioned COMP when
I think before we get in, we need to be clear. We're going to talk about a few of the stages, not all of them.
Yeah, no,
because there were like a few ones that we focused on the ones that are really focused on the game and the Jagex strategy, but also there's so much content in here we could do a show about each of them. We've decided to group them together and sort of focus on the highlights, but I do invite the listeners, if there's like any topic of these talks that we're skimming over today that you're like, hey, I would love to hear your opinion on it, put it in the comments and maybe we'll put it in a future episode.
Yeah, and our notes on this, the notes that you made are linked in the show notes for this. Yes, so you'll be able to
multiple pages of notes.
You'll be able to go through these and see what we're working off of emojis included. I just noticed you have some in there. But
Yes.
is comp coming to OSRS? Oh boy. Oh boy.
Yeah, they did a little bit of a vote basically in the audience by noise levels, and it was very mixed. It seems that there's people that really want this. It seems that there's people who really don't want this. I'm in the not wanting this camp because I think it shifts the focus of the game too much toward,
It really does, because then it makes the path max, comp, and so on and so forth, and where things like Quest Cape and Trim Quest Cape and all that fit in.
But I think they are very self-aware, and this is what makes me really happy, is that what happens in RS3 is that there's this negative relation to new content of all the people who have achieved some level of completionist content in the past. Because everybody is always like, oh, now I need to do this,
right, and it's led to
always this
discussion. Led to an official policy on grace periods too.
Yeah, and so having not necessarily just coming up with an official definition of what should and shouldn't be included, also making sure that people don't start seeing maintaining completionists as a chore, because I think that really changes the relation with the game as a whole towards a negative one.
Yeah, that's true, and I'm gonna say that it should probably strive to be as OSRS compliant as it can, and I think in order to do that, I don't think you put comp into the game, because you question what would be on comp, right? You start considering things. Well, obviously Max would be on comp, and Quest Cape would be on comp, because those are things that you're going to do along the way. But what else do you consider in that category? For OSRS, because we don't have generalist achievements. We have the combat achievements, of course, in game. Maybe then you consider tiers of combat achievement on the comp cape, or you had a parallel set of achievements, kind of in the same way that RS3 did. And because of that, I think that's a very RS3-centric approach. And if that were to be the design for comp, as in Max plus Quest and some combat achievements and some other achievements along the way, I don't think that necessarily feels OSRS-wise, because like you said, it's something you have to chase. And I feel like there are things you can chase in OS that you don't necessarily, how do I put this? It doesn't necessarily feel like you need to chase them, and you can be compelled to, but you don't need to. You're not punished if you don't, for example, go get the Inferno Cape. It's a nice thing to have if you want, the prestige around it, but it's not something you absolutely need to chase.
Yeah.
So I wonder what the timeline on this would be for considering it.
I don't think it is a priority for them right now. Okay. And I think that is the right... this is not the right thing to solve right now, I think.
No, it's not. Okay. They have also said that they will not pull sailing going forward, as in there won't be a green light pull for it, but they will be pulling most of the traditional content that comes around with it, like new logs, and there will be lots of blogs and vlogs in the coming month, because there's a lot to get through. I mean, I guess we're going to have our content strategy sorted for that.
I like this, right? They also said at some in the recent post that they released this week that the player designed island competition won't be at launch. I think there's a lot of content they can fill the seas with after the initial sailing release, but it needs to be populated to be worth training sailing.
Yeah,
and this is fun. I'm looking forward to this. I don't know what more to say on this.
Well,
this is expected, I think.
I'll say one thing. One thing that gets addressed when we start looking at these polls involving the content around sailing is what we talked about on the episode, where the question of, do I go sail to this spot to do X, or do I just go do it in a more convenient place that's a teleport and 15 seconds away? I feel like that question will probably come up in some of the content pieces that are dropped, based on how lucrative they can be and how difficult to get to with the boat.
This is what we talked about during the Sailing Alpha episode a few weeks ago, and I think that is going to be a very complex question that they're going to need to solve.
Yeah, and I'd imagine there's an answer to that probably in the back of their heads about this, even being able to consider such a thing, and it'll be interesting to see how that's presented in the posts, because when you look at other things that have been recently presented for polls, specifically the Delve boss, how many times we've been up and down on that, it raises a question of, exactly what was going on with that. And the sense I got from this is that it was just very interesting to watch. What did you take from the Q&A on this?
You mean the Delve boss rewards?
Yeah, the Delve boss rewards section.
I really appreciated the introspection here, which is that they basically said, you know what? It's really hard to have these discussions because I think there's sort of a fear that it's wasted time if things don't come into the game eventually, right?
Yeah.
And there is a certain fear among Jagex that polls might fail. And I think this has been pointed out by the community, like, all the polls just succeed, right? Like everybody just always votes yes on all of the polls. I think that's largely because Jagex pulls the controversial ones before they even make it.
And this has been something I've wanted to do for an episode on a quiet week, and maybe we should, now that this has been put forward, is that, what is the polling success rate? And if we look at all the polls out there that have failed, what are they and what do they have in common?
Yeah.
I think that would be an interesting thing to look at here. And the comment that I think stood out to me is that Madaiza said that maybe the dev team should just be okay with polls failing, rather than, worrying about it.
Look, right now, what we're seeing is rewards get proposed. Then there is a discussion about it, not just on Reddit, but like multiple platforms. And then if there's a generally negative sentiment, it's assumed that the poll will fail and it gets either pulled or reworked. Maybe there needs to be more willingness to just put these up for vote and see what the community as a whole actually thinks. Now, it might be that that too many people are uninformed and just end up voting yes on everything, and it actually drops the quality of what comes into the game. That's possible. That's a possible outcome.
It's a scary thought.
Which is a scary thought. Or it might mean that more polls start failing, and then you have like a clear representative picture of the entire community of how problematic that really is.
Right.
I think personally they need to do more polls that aren't just passing polls, but multiple choice, right? Here are two designs. Which one do you prefer?
Right.
That's what I would like to see a little bit more of. Because now it's very much, green light polls.
Yeah, and if we go back to the entire question of the Delve boss rewards, and in particular the magic side of the equation, and we can look at the cape, or we can look at the question around the shadow that we talked about last week on that, and there's the world out there where the dev working on a reward at the end of the day just forgets, or has it as an oversight of a certain interaction that the players are acutely aware of, week to week. And, it becomes an interesting question. Well, then do you pull something in that regard if it was, an oversight, or do you, pull back and consult like they did and put something out that's definitely going to pass? Because that happened with the Delve Boss rewards pool.
Yeah.
Everything passed. So, and I mean, hey, maybe the community needs to say that, only 20% like this idea, and then you probe it and you wonder why.
Yep.
So,
yeah.
All right.
And look, I think also if a poll passes, but afterwards there are design issues with it, I think you should be happy to be like, okay, then we're pulling it now. We're making changes to it, and we'll re-poll it, right? Like,
right.
If it gets,
but then don't you get to the point then where polls are seen to be binding if you pull something after that?
I don't know. Like, if you change it significantly enough, I think you should be willing to just re-pull it.
Okay. Fair enough. Narrative direction. Unless you have anything else on that.
No, I just think in general that I think we like the topic of polling is always one we sort of end up dancing around discussing on the show. But I think it is that important to the game and how it feels. And what I really took away from this is that they are aware that this is not in the right spot right now and that they want to actually revisit it.
Yeah, that's good, because this has caused me actually a substantial amount of agony over the past number of months whenever we talk about that Varlamore poll in particular. Because it's like nails on a chalkboard to me. But narrative direction, which, you look at old school story and you think that, they really got this with the wonderful mod Ed up there, and, just teeing all this up. It's amazing to see everything that they highlighted here, and I think it's reassuring and refreshing to see the core pillars of the game story just articulated in such a way that were on the slides there. So
yeah,
discovery. That's something that's always been with me for RuneScape. Whether it be, figuring out what the Majorat were going to be from dig site to desert treasure, and then, getting a different glimpse of what the hell's going on up there, secrets in the north. So that's always been good for me on that one. Progression, worth is earned and not given. And
this one I wanna give a little bit more attention.
Okay.
Because
good, me too.
This one is so important, and I think people underestimate it. The decision to progression, worth is earned not given, is really actually important to how the gameplay of old school feels. The example they gave there is that even Tutorial Island represents this pillar by the fact that you are not just given things, right? You have to work for it, even in the, you're given bronze tools, but that's about the extent of it, right? Then you're being shown, how do you collect ores, how do you smelt them, how do you turn them into a dagger, and then how do you kill a rat with that dagger? That kind of, that level of, integrating gameplay with narrative really helps, and that is something you feel throughout the entire thing. And we'll get back to this when they talk about Varlamore a little bit later. But in general, games are a very, very interesting medium, because we are, of course, very used to consuming narratives in a one-directional way, right? Where, like video, like movies, books, the story is there. You just sit there and take it all in, and then sure, there's other ways of then discussing it with other people, but overall it's very much, it's a one-way door.
Yeah.
Games, you are part of the story, and if sure, you can treat it like the movie model where you tell the story through cutscenes, but if you make the player work for it and be involved with it, what you end up getting actually is that the narrative experience and the narrative engagement actually becomes stronger. You know, I don't know if I can come up with like a good example from the top of my head, but imagine a game where you build up a bond with, say, like a different character or like a different pet, and then they become like cursed or mortally ill, and now you have to kill them to put them out of their misery. Very dark, and that's a good story in general, a good story arc. But now, if you as a player have to click the button to actually do it, that can really elevate that experience. That's what this pillar is all about.
Yeah, and I see another aspect of this too, in that when we look at the quests in particular with this, the thing that has become apparent to me is that you compare the quests between OS and RS3, and you have a Grandmaster quest in RS3 that has a level 95 skill requirement. Okay, and then there's a story mode boss there. Fine, most people with decent enough level 70 or level 80 gear will be fine with that. Whereas with old school, the quest requirements are actually a little bit more tame in terms of like the raw levels that you need to unlock and do the quests. But you're not guaranteed to actually be able to get through that quest. And this kind of ties into that thing again, where nothing is earned, and you, in the same way that you said you might need to, in effect, put that character out of their misery, you, in this case, need to figure out how to control your character to elevate them to that next level to unlock and progress through that story.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like, I feel like I have never felt better in old school when achieving hard things, right? First fight case, absolutely amazing. First Zora kill feels really good. Like, that's the moments that really sort of are solid memories for me. And I think the same will hold for some of the Grandmaster quests. I thought the fragment of Saren fight was actually pretty amazing. Actually, I know you have different opinions about this, but
it's movement and combat, which is a bane for me on anything RS.
How did it feel? How did it feel being able to finally overcome that? What is the sense, like the emotion that sort of cost you and gave you?
You want my truthful answer there?
Well, yes.
I was glad that it was done and that my wrist wasn't hurting anymore, and I had to take another look back at the quest to really just see what the value of it was, because I didn't like being needed to move around and effectively put myself through a movement test to complete that. I understand that maybe that wasn't.
That's better than a DPS. That's better than a DPS check. Let's be honest. So.
Well, I mean, that's a matter of perspective. But what I'll say is that maybe that wasn't the best Grandmaster for us to first dip our toes in.
Sure.
So, anything else on the progression model, or do you want to move into variety? Because this is also another key thing in terms of the stories that go on, because you have many storylines in the game that in other video games and other, big chapter-driven MMOs out there, you're on a specific story track and you are locked into that until it's complete. Whereas, in OS, we have a number of, juggling pans. No, what's the spinning plates? That's the reference right there. A number of spinning plates up in the air about all the different storylines that are going, and you have that. But at the same time, this discussion of variety also, of course, perfectly touches on the frog quest as well.
Mm-hmm. I love that those small quests can exist alongside a deeper quest like Garden of Death.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, Gielinor always must feel like home. So even though the game is constantly evolving, there are new areas and quests that contribute to the reworking of old content. The game will never stay the same. However, keeping the game fresh and making sure that it never stops feeling like home. And to me, the sense is that this ticks off the box that it feels like RuneScape.
Mm-hmm.
And if it can't do this, then what is it trying to do?
Yeah. For old school especially, this makes sense.
Yeah. And that's interesting looking at it that comparing it to in the RS3 angle, because I think if we go back in time and we look at some of the stories that have happened, particularly in the later years of RS3, you move away from that traditional RuneScape feel, don't you? In some cases, no.
It is indeed one of the reasons I think I started moving away from old school. RS3 rather.
Oh, okay.
Like I really like for the longest time I would have identified as a quester.
Mm-hmm.
In RS3, but that became less and less the case as time moved on, because like you said, the quests just, it wasn't the same anymore. And not to say that they aren't good stories. It's just that familiarity was gone. Like, it all had to be bigger. It all had to be like Marvel level, world-ending superhero stuff. And that's not what RuneScape was traditionally. It was quirky. It was, I mean, yes, also grim and mature themes, as they say in that variety thing, but yeah.
Where do we have grim and mature themes in RS? In old school or RS3?
The Vampire series is pretty dark.
Okay, I can see that. Well, I'm gonna jump
even some of the Elf series, but like the Plague is pretty, pretty grim.
Okay, fair enough. The key rules. One of us highlighted this. I don't remember if it was me or if it was you.
Yeah, it's me. I mean, I don't want to go over all of them, but I love, most of these really resonated with me. Also, the one thing they pointed out is that they didn't mean to dunk on RS3 as part of this, but these rules, half of these, I think, have been broken by RS3, and they almost were made for old school in response to that, to sort of avoid the problems that RS3 worked themselves into. Right? So we talked about the player isn't special, nothing is given away for free. But I think the interesting ones are that the gods will never return and the game is set on Gielinor in the 5th age. I know at some point you were like, oh, what if they go to the 6th age at some point? And no.
I was mainly trolling with that.
Well, now you can't even troll with that anymore because it's a rule. They're not going to do it.
Yeah. And again, like I highlighted earlier in the show, that big bifurcation point came around, that move to the 6th age, the new user interface, and of course the evolution of combat. And that's why I said it's always going to be something that stands out whenever dealing with combat, whenever dealing with the question of the gods. It's a question of where does OS go and where can't it go? And I don't see that as a dunk on RS3 personally. I see that as something that is integral to the DNA of OS.
I love what you said there, where it can't go. I think that's the real important thing about this narrative direction, right? It doesn't just talk about where the game can go. It very much constrains where the game can go, which is
Correct.
very important to maintain some form of internal consistency.
Right.
And,
because
and reading through all of this, I was like, yes, to all of this, yes. If this is what you're gonna keep doing and you're gonna keep giving us quests every month on average, I will keep playing for it. Like, yeah.
Right. And my thing is that on RS3 you go and you talk to Zaros numerous times.
Yeah.
You can't here. And in many ways, it makes it more interesting because, one, it keeps up the mystery and the push for discovery when you can't do that. But also, based on who you talk to about Zaros, as an example, on OS, whoever you talk to, you can get different perspectives. So you could, in effect, in theory, have 5 different quests looking into the theology of Zaros on OS, whereas on RS3, he's just going to tell you.
Yes, and that I really love this, right? Like this, and then here it also says, not everything is knowable. What I really like is that it maintains the concept of unreliable narrators, which is awesome, right? It's such a fun tool as a storyteller to have unreliable narrators. I like in my own D&D campaign, I use them all the time. And it's really funny. My players sometimes pick up on it, but they actually think that the reliable narrators are sometimes lying. So it's always like a fun, but it's really interesting, and you can create mysteries, but also, I don't know how big of a thing it is in old school RuneScape, but I know, especially for some period of time in RuneScape, and I think arguably this was before the 6th Age really started kicking off, is people were like aligned with one of the gods, like pretty heavily sometimes. We had some hardcore like Graphixians or Serenists or Seradomis or even some Zamorakians, right?
Yeah,
and I think the moment you put the gods in front of the player, it doesn't work as well anymore. And
that's what I was going to say. If you look at RS3's World Event 1, everybody thought that Zamorak was going to win that because it's the Teenage Edgelords playing RS. But the reality is everybody viewed it as good versus evil, so Saradomin won, and that's not what they intended behind the scenes. And what this all comes back to with OS is that it's not immediately you're not immediately able to understand these characters, and the perspective you get from whoever is much more interesting than just what winds up being imparted by the community there.
Mm-hmm.
So, was there anything you wanted to mention specifically about the Varlamore stuff?
No, I think just going back to the narrative design and forming, like the gameplay, they were really telling about how Varlamore was really built out of, they wanted to base it on certain stories and certain, themes like Roman, a little bit of like Maya and Mesoamerican in general. And basically, the Blessed Bone Shards was the example they gave, essentially came completely out of, what would be the lore appropriate thing. And that, I think, is a really good example of how important the narrative design is. And I think it is a really good example of why Varlamore just feels right.
I think back to our first Varlamore launch episode, and I think what I said is that I felt like I was very immersed in the culture, both through what we were talking who we were talking to and what we saw. And that lines right up on that.
Yeah.
So, based on survey data, quests are among the most popular content in OSRS.
Yes, I was surprised, and
Yeah,
I
me too.
could not be happier.
Me too, because I've seen that same stat on the RS3 side, and I don't think it's that.
I think it makes sense for the game to be like that. I think, I think skilling is part of it, like the different skills and the way you can just be good at many different things and progress in many different ways. But I think the unique ways of telling stories and actually having gameplay in quests rather than fetch quests really, really sold RuneScape to me in the first place. And I also think that a lot of people that longed for that familiarity, right? Like we always say that old school came in response to EOC, and I think in a sense it did, but I think it has also grown with people like me who
I think the 6th Age was also an important part of that.
Exactly. I think a lot of people sort of longed for the familiarity of like old school quests, where I use old school not as a name but as a term.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, why we have a lot of, I don't want to call them refugees, but a lot of people who migrated to old school because of the quests, and that's why the stats are the way they are. And sure, I think there's also fans of like big set piece quests in RS3, but it's very much, I think, a different way of engaging with the story and the game.
Yeah, and I put myself in that camp that the original goal was Quest Point Gate, and here we are.
Yes.
Moving on, boss design. This is an interesting one, I think, because again, just like when it comes to narrative, it was very well thought out in terms of what was highlighted in the panel here.
This was my favorite panel, I think.
Which is shocking. That shocked me.
I don't know. I mean, I've really enjoyed what I've been doing with PVM recently. I've been telling them, that they've been nailing it, and then seeing these people that work on this content actually communicating about it and sounding like they actually know what they're doing kind of makes sense.
Yeah. Biggest challenge, making grindable, fun bosses. Yes. Because otherwise you have something that just winds up being a boring piñata that you're hitting for whatever the drop is at the end of the day. And I always ask this question to people who do PVM. It doesn't matter what the game is. I always ask this question. Are you doing this boss because it is fun? Or are you doing it because it is the best money that you can get in the game? And if it is that latter question, I have serious concerns about what's going on. But if if somebody can explain why something is fun, then that's all the better.
Yeah. No, and like the difference here is with like if you play like a Dark Souls or like a Souls-like game, right? Those bosses are complicated and fun and difficult, but they're only really meant to be fought once. Quest bosses in RuneScape are similar, right? You kill them really only once. I mean, maybe multiple times on multiple accounts, but you don't have to go and sit there and kill them 1,000 times to get that one drop you really want.
Yeah.
Those bosses are designed very differently. But at the same time, you can't make a boss just like you said, a loot pinata, because that is also not fun. So how do you strike that balance? And it was sort of highlighted in the encounter, in the talk, that was really one of their main challenges.
Echo bosses, specifically the idea of replacing KQ with Echo KQ. How would you do that? Oh my God. I had my own adventure with leaks this year, but hands down, after killing regular KQ hundreds of times in the original old school back in the day, yes, I would absolutely love it if main KQ was replaced with Echo KQ. And it speaks to modern mechanics, right? And I surprised you with that, didn't I? Because you didn't know if I would have fun with it, and I did.
yeah, because it's movement, and you just chat on movement and the fragments of Starin fight. So
I know. But here's the thing though. I had fun with Echo KQ, but I could only do, a half hour to 45 minutes of it in one sitting before my wrist got sore. So I need to figure something out for that.
You need to get like a better mouse. That's what I think you need.
Yeah, maybe. Anyways.
Go put all of your suggestions for good vertical mouses in the YouTube comments and force Shane to read them.
My issue is that I have a MOBA mouse.
You don't need that in old school.
I know, but I play other games that do need that, so I use it.
No, I think the difference was really out of the design philosophy. They really started thinking, what would it be like to fight a big lightning bug in a way that is fun, right? And then the mechanics follow by themselves. Just like we talked about how Varlamore mechanics followed out of narrative, this is very similar, right? They are like not necessarily narrative, but from feel. Like we call this game feel. Like feel should inform mechanics. So there's actually something in game design that we call the MFA framework. So you have mechanics, you have feel, and you have aesthetic. Aesthetic is really the theme of the game. So if you go back to like the narrative thing, you have, Division, which is old school world. RuneScape is set in the world of Gielinor, grounded yet wonders, yada, 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 right? That's the aesthetic of the game. Then you have the feel. What should the player experience? What should they feel when they play the game? And here, what they really wanted to cover is a big lightning bug in a way that is fun. That's what they wanted the game to feel. And then the mechanics were based off that, rather than just building mechanics because that's what the engine can do. There's a shift in design philosophy here, and that's why Echo KQ works.
That's an interesting way of looking at it, because the question of lightning, and specifically the thing I was worried about before I fought it was how is this going to work with the grid-based movement system, right? But the way they telegraphed the lightning, it was clear that it would work with that, and it's leaning into that A part, the aesthetic part of how the game is built on that. So that's an interesting framework now that you mention it. Okay.
If there's a common theme I want to take away from all of these talks, is that I really see a level of maturity entering the way they develop old school. Okay. With all of these frameworks,
yeah,
and
I can
ways
see
of
that.
thinking about it.
Okay. Power creep.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, of course, because of old school power creep. We want horizontal content. And the challenge they're having is that the only way they can really solve the power creep by the fact that the accuracy bonuses and the damage bonuses just keep stacking up is the only way they can make a boss survive for longer than 2 seconds is by ramping up its defense like mad. But then you get lower than 70% accuracy, and it actually kind of just feels bad if you miss like
and that's
more
what
than like 1 out of 3 attacks.
And that's what I say, and that's what the wiki DPS calculator has shown me, is that accuracy is the pain in the butt. You optimize for that in game, and then as soon as you can get your accuracy up, like you said, up to a point where you're not missing 1 in 3, then it becomes a more enjoyable fight, and it's about knowing how to respond to whatever's put in front of you to
but then you need to either make bosses like massive bags of hit points, which isn't fun, or you need to do something to cap the damage, and like there's ways, but like it doesn't really work. So that's something they need to solve, and they have solutions like the guaranteed Dragon Warhammer hits on say Tecton to make it work. But yeah, this seems to be a continuous concern. But one of the things that they said, and just to reference back to the narrative direction one, the game should remain recognizable so that the meta doesn't shift every few months, which I think is good, right? You want your investments in high level gear to remain long for the to remain valuable in the long term.
Yeah.
But also, it sits right in the narrative direction pillar of familiarity.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been a part of other MMOs before where the meta basically changes with every patch, and that can be quite fun if you're up for power fantasy. But beyond that, it kind of isn't. So I appreciate the conservative aspect here. But let's move on to art right now, because I feel like when we look at this, you bring it back to the question of how does this game look, and you consider the fact that you have a Java client backing up RuneLite, which is the old engine. It comes down to just how can you make the game look with that Java client up until now, before we start heading towards that HD era.
Well, even if we get the HD, it's not going to be the default, because there will be people who will stick for RuneLite at least for the foreseeable future. So it is a question of how long. You can't rely on HD. But all in all, I would say, yeah, I don't know. The thing that surprised me most, and I think you bolded this, is that a lot of times people look at screenshots and the game of old school and people don't play that for the graphics.
Yeah,
I don't think that is true. Not anymore, at least. I mean, I know you play it despite the graphics, but at the same time,
I know you didn't. I know you didn't want to talk about it on this episode, but we got the teaser for Dragon Wilds, the survival game, this week, and that is graphical fidelity to the max on the Unreal
but that's
Engine.
Unreal 5.
I know, and that is part of the reason I am going to play that game.
I don't know. I think people are all impressed by how great it looks, and I don't want to undermine that. But also, it's Unreal 5, and also I can show you a different game that is out right now in early access. That is also an open world survivor game and has basically the exact same graphics.
Yeah, and I mean, to be fair, when you look at the toolkitting done with Unreal 5, you're going to be in that category, but applying the RuneScape to it has an appeal, because there's a portion of us out there who have wanted that for years, and I'll direct people to the RS3 show from this week if you want to hear more about that.
It doesn't look RuneScape. What about it makes it feel like it is related to RuneScape, except for the name they put on it and the party hat they put on one of the characters?
It's set in the world. It looks like the buildings look RuneScape-y. There's a divination.
Well, no, they
rift.
don't. They look generic medieval, so it happens to be RuneScape-y.
I thought it looked RuneScape-y.
Yeah. That's the thing that's the problem I have, is that you can make everything look RuneScape-y by putting the label on it, but you can't make anything look old schooly by putting the label on it.
And that's the official charm of OSRS, and this thing about why I bolded it. People don't play the game for the graphics, but I point people back to the question of changing little graphical things and updating models here and there. People always like the traditional one more. So people do play it for the graphics.
The fact that RS3 can ask people to pay real life money to get the old models back should give you pause. I mean, I have come to prefer the old school graphic style over the RS3 graphic style. Hands down, not a competition. Both in terms of readability, but also because it feels like an actual style. And I know more of the recent RS3 stuff has become more consistent, but it also has become a lot more generic. It doesn't feel as uniquely RuneScape anymore.
Right,
it feels
and
like
you guarantee
I could find in a different game.
And you guarantee that you have And you guarantee that you have that in OSRS. And that's why people like the charm and the graphics around
Exactly.
So there we have it. People do play old school for the graphics. It's just not the way people play other games for the graphics, I'll say.
And I think what they have been able to do within the limits, like they have actually been able to make beautiful environments in old school, right? I think some of the Varlamore environments are gorgeous. Like what they've done with the models there, absolutely love it. And together with the soundtrack, I think they do a really good job at still evoking feelings.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That to me is not something that I think RS3 has replicated, and I don't think that is something that Dragon Wilds will be able to replicate. And I think that is a unique strength that old school has. Like, I'm also not saying they should have to like replicate it, right? It's just a unique strength that old school has, and that they really seem to be nurturing.
Right. And I think you see that the most when you go into those quests that have that emotional connection, just to bring it back to, previous sections of this Q&A discussion.
Yes.
So, the final thing I want to mention is the fact that we have emojis in this doc. No real need to revisit existing areas. Mod West says, like fixing the rest of Corinth, and you say you need this.
Oh yeah, no. So this was in response to a Q&A question where like,
okay.
Do you want to like revisit existing areas in the world, like Lumbridge or Varrock? And they basically said they didn't feel they needed to. Like they feel they were actually in a pretty good spot. However, Mod West would really like to go and finally finish the current rework that he started.
Oh, and go okay.
Yeah, I'm like, yes, please give it to me. I want the reworked current. I love the new reworked areas. I love especially the Shasian area and the current woodlands.
Yeah.
Like some of my favorite places in the world. And I cannot wait to see the same treatment being given to the Lovek Hang area, which like one of the worst looking areas in the game right now, in my opinion.
Right, it was that Shasian area and the Isle of Souls where I first picked up on the OS graphical identity.
Yes, exactly. So that's why the emoji are there. I need it.
Well, there we have it, a smattering of questions that we picked out from four of the RuneFest stage keynotes, secondary stage keynotes. If you have any further ones that you've watched or things that you'd like us to address, as Sirion said, let us know in the comments, and we'll see what we can do about that if there's anything to that effect that pops up. But I think that was a good discussion to have, and something that should have been done sooner, but we had other fish to fry this month, so to speak. So, but
yeah,
you're away for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I'm going to do my best to not burn the place down while you're gone. He will be back after that, and I made sure to frame it in a way that didn't sound ominous, because you said it sounded too ominous last week. But if you do want the next episodes delivered automatically to you, subscribe, update.show/OS. We're on all the podcast listening services out there. Anything else from you before you depart?
No. I'll see you later this month.
Alrighty then. Well, with that being said, this has been OSRS Update. Full show notes can be found over at update.show/OS. And we'll see you guys next week for another episode of OSRS Update. See you then, everyone. Take care.
Bye.